Hey guys, tonight we find ourselves deep in the heart of a lush, vibrant Africa. Imagine the humid air clinging to your skin, the insistent buzz of insects serenading you, and the earthy scent of damp soil rising around you. You're trekking through dense foliage, sunlight dappling through the canopy, each step a careful negotiation with roots and vines. The path beneath your feet is ancient, worn smooth by generations of travelers, warriors, and kings. And just ahead, shimmering in the distance like a mirage, lies the kingdom of Ndongo. You probably won't survive this history lesson, mostly because it's bedtime and you might just drift off. But hey, at least it'll be a comfortable descent into slumber. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it where you are? Let me know in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are now a sojourner, a witness to the genesis of Ndongo. Forget the modern world for a bit. Trade in that smartphone for a clay pot, that laptop for a woven mat. The world around you is a kaleidoscope of green and brown, teeming with life both visible and hidden. You see bustling villages, smoke curling lazily from cooking fires, the rhythmic pulse of drums echoing through the valleys. Ndongo, emerging around the 14th century, was no mere village cluster. It was a rising power, carving its place in the Angolan highlands through shrewd diplomacy and, when necessary, a strong military. You can feel the ambition simmering in the air, the determination to not just survive, but to thrive. Oral traditions tell of its early rulers, figures shrouded in myth and legend, each adding a brick to the foundation of what would become a formidable kingdom. The early political landscape was a network of smaller chiefdoms, each vying for power and influence. Ndongo, through cunning alliances and strategic conquests, gradually rose above the fray, consolidating its dominance. Historians still argue whether Ndongo's rise was due to superior military tactics or the simple luck of geography, but one thing's for sure, they were good at it. And you are there, witnessing it all unfold. You see the intricate rituals, the ceremonies that bind the people together, the respect shown to elders and ancestors. Their spiritual beliefs are woven into the fabric of everyday life, with reverence for nature and the power of unseen forces. You feel their connection to the land, their understanding of its rhythms and secrets. You also see, with a pang of what will soon be dread, the wealth being accumulated by the kings, a wealth that will eventually draw unwelcome visitors to these shores. You notice the details. The way women cultivate the land, their hands moving with practiced grace. The skill of the blacksmiths, hammering out tools and weapons with fiery precision. The intricate patterns woven into the cloth, each design telling a story. You hear the songs sung at festivals, the tales told around crackling fires, preserving the kingdom's history and identity. The importance of storytelling in Ndongo culture can't be overstated. It was the primary means of transmitting knowledge, values, and traditions from one generation to the next. Remember, no Netflix here. The elders were living, breathing libraries. One quirky detail you pick up on is the Ndongan tradition of using jimbo shells as currency. Imagine paying for your groceries with seashells. You might even pick one up as a souvenir, a tangible reminder of this time. You see traders from neighboring kingdoms arriving with goods to exchange, bustling markets filled with vibrant colors and exotic aromas. The kingdom's location made it a natural hub for trade, connecting the interior with the coastal regions. This economic activity fueled its growth and provided access to valuable resources. Salt, copper, and iron were particularly prized commodities, driving regional trade. But this tranquility is not destined to last. A storm is brewing on the horizon, a storm that will test the very foundations of Ndongo. You sense it in the air, a subtle shift in the mood, an undercurrent of unease. Whispers of strange ships arriving on the coast reach your ears, carrying men with pale skin and unfamiliar weapons. These newcomers, the Portuguese, come bearing promises of trade and friendship, but their true intentions are far more sinister. Mainstream historical fact, the arrival of the Portuguese marked a turning point in the history of Ndongo and the entire region. Initially, relations between Ndongo and the Portuguese were tentative, a dance of diplomacy and suspicion. Trade flourished, bringing new goods and opportunities to both sides. But the Portuguese desire for slaves grew with each passing year, driven by the insatiable demand for labor in their burgeoning colonies across the Atlantic. You see the glint of greed in their eyes, the casual cruelty in their dealings. You hear the stories of men, women, and children being captured and forced onto ships, their cries fading into the vastness of the ocean. You witness the transformation of Ndongo's society, as the threat of Portuguese aggression looms larger. The kingdom is forced to adapt, to militarize, to prepare for a conflict that seems inevitable. You see warriors training with spears and shields, their faces etched with determination. You hear the rallying cries of Angola, the king, urging his people to defend their land and their freedom. You feel the weight of history pressing down on you, the sense that you are witnessing a pivotal moment in the destiny of Ndongo. Historians still argue about the true motivations of the early Portuguese explorers. Were they primarily driven by a desire for trade, or was the pursuit of slaves the dominant factor? Maybe it was both. The Colombo, fortified settlements, become crucial to Ndongo's defense. Imagine living within the walls of one of these structures, a constant state of alert, knowing that danger could strike at any moment. You see the resourcefulness of the Ndongan people, their ability to adapt and innovate in the face of adversity. They develop new tactics for warfare, learn to use the terrain to their advantage, and forge alliances with neighboring kingdoms. You also see the toll that constant conflict takes on the population, the exhaustion and despair that begin to creep in. One quirky thing about the Colombo defenses, they were not just physical structures, but also centers of resistance, fostering a spirit of defiance against the Portuguese. Some were even governed by women. And as the sun dips below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land, you know that the story of Ndongo is far from over. You have seen its rise, its resilience, and the gathering storm that threatens to engulf it. The stage is set for a clash of cultures, a struggle for survival, a battle that will shape the future of Angola. Alright, settle in, friend. Let's journey back in time, way back, to 1583, give or take a year. Picture this, you're in Ndongo, a kingdom nestled in what we now call Angola. It's hot. Humid. The air is thick with the scent of unfamiliar flowers and, well, let's be honest, probably a bit of whatever passed for plumbing back then. You can almost feel the red earth beneath your bare feet, if you were there, of course. You're not. You're here, hopefully comfortable, and I'm here to tell you a story. And this story? It's about a queen. Not just any queen, mind you. This is Nzinga Band, a woman who, spoiler alert, will spend the next chunk of her life giving Portuguese colonizers a serious headache. But before she's commanding armies and playing political chess, she's just a kid. You see her, right? A baby, all squishy and new, held in her mother's arms. Her mother is Guerrilla Nzinga. Guerrilla was one of the wives of Angola or King, Kiluanji Kia Ndambai. You can almost hear the cooing, the soft lullabies sung in Kimbundu, the local language. It's probably a tune you wouldn't recognize, but there's a sweetness to it, a primal comfort. You know, the kind of thing that makes you want to curl up in a blanket and take a nap. But stay awake, okay? We're just getting started. Now, the mainstream historical fact here is that Nzinga was born into royalty. That's pretty clear. Her dad was the king, after all. But here's a quirky tidbit, legend has it that Nzinga was born with the umbilical cord wrapped around her neck. Now, in many cultures, that's considered a bad omen. But not in hers. Instead, the shaman interpreted it as a sign that she would be a powerful and important ruler. Talk about turning lemons into lemonade, huh? Or, in this case, a strangulation hazard into a prophecy. Her early childhood, well, it was probably a mix of privilege and peril. Being royalty meant she likely had access to the best food, clothing, and education available at the time. Think of it as the 17th century equivalent of a private school, except instead of learning calculus, she was probably learning about warfare, diplomacy, and how to wear a really elaborate headdress without getting a neck cramp. The other thing, though, is that royal life could be, shall we say, complicated. Power struggles, rivalries, assassinations, it was basically Game of Thrones, but with more sunshine and less gratuitous nudity. Not that I'm complaining about either of those things. Just saying. Growing up, you can imagine her observing everything. She's a sponge, soaking up the intricacies of court life, the whispers and deals made in the shadows, the carefully choreographed displays of power. She's watching her father, the king, trying to keep his kingdom intact amidst the growing threat of the Portuguese. They're sniffing around, eager to exploit Ndongo's resources and, of course, convert everyone to Christianity. Because, you know, that's always the excuse. We're not here for the gold. We're here to save your souls. Right. And I'm a space alien. Historians still argue whether Nzinga's early exposure to these political machinations shaped her personality or if she was just naturally a badass. Maybe it was a little of both. Regardless, it's clear she was a keen observer, a quick learner, and possessed an innate understanding of human nature. You know, the kind of person who could probably win any argument, even if they were totally wrong. And let's be honest, those are the most dangerous people. Let's move on to her siblings. Nzinga had a brother, Bandi, who was older, and two sisters, Kambu and Fungi. Now, sibling relationships are always interesting, aren't they? Full of love, rivalry, resentment, the whole shebang. And in a royal family, those dynamics are amplified tenfold. Imagine Thanksgiving dinner at their house. I bet the gravy boat was a battleground. Her brother, Bandi, was the heir apparent. He was supposed to inherit the throne. Now, it's not that he was disliked, but some sources do say he was not particularly strong-willed or politically savvy. Which, in a kingdom facing imminent colonial threat, is not exactly ideal. You can practically feel the tension in the air, the unspoken question of whether he's really up to the task. Nzinga, on the other hand, was, well, let's just say she was a firecracker. She was intelligent, charismatic, and possessed a fierce determination that would make a honey badger jealous. She wasn't afraid to speak her mind, even if it meant challenging the status quo. And in a patriarchal society, that was a pretty big deal. You can just imagine the eye rolls she probably got from some of the older, more conservative members of the court. Oh, here comes Nzinga again, stirring up trouble. Can't she just be quiet and embroider something? But Nzinga wasn't interested in embroidery. She was interested in power. And she wasn't afraid to fight for it. Literally. She was trained in military tactics and weaponry, just like her brother. She wasn't just some pretty face in a fancy dress. She was a warrior. A strategist. A force to be reckoned with. Here's where things get a bit murky. Historians have pieced together a picture of Nzinga's childhood based on oral traditions, Portuguese accounts, which, let's face it, are probably biased, and archaeological evidence. But there are still gaps in the story. Details that are lost to time. Things we can only speculate about. One thing that is certain, though, is that she developed a deep understanding of her people, their culture, and their traditions. She spoke the language fluently. She knew their customs. She understood their fears and their hopes. And that connection would prove to be invaluable later on when she rallied them against the Portuguese. Another thing is that, even as a child, Nzinga showed a remarkable talent for diplomacy. She was able to navigate complex social situations, negotiate with powerful figures, and win people over to her side. It was like she was born with a natural ability to read people and understand what motivated them. She was basically a human lie detector. So, there you have it. A glimpse into the early life of Nzinga Band. A princess, a warrior, a diplomat. A woman who would go on to become one of the most important figures in Angolan history. But this is just the beginning of her story. Stay tuned, because things are about to get a whole lot more interesting. Okay, settle in. Let's get comfy. Dim the lights, maybe light a candle if you're feeling fancy. We're still wading through the early days, remember? You've established a humble little settlement on this Southeast Asian coast. The sun's probably setting, casting these long, dramatic shadows. You can almost taste the salt in the air, can't you? Just breathe it in. Inhale the history. Exhale your anxieties about that overdue library book. You can feel the sand between your toes as you walk along the beach. It's coarse, surprisingly warm, even as the evening cools. The waves are doing that gentle, rhythmic thing they do, whispering secrets you can almost, but not quite, understand. Seagulls squawk overhead, probably complaining about the lack of free fish. Standard. It hasn't been that long since you claimed this little slice of paradise, built a few houses, planted some crops. Life is peaceful. Predictable, maybe even a little boring. But hey, at least you're not battling scurvy or something. Small victories, right? But that sense of quietude, that idyllic isolation? Yeah, that's not going to last. Nothing good ever does. Because, over the horizon, bobbing like ominous little toys, come the ships. Portuguese ships. You squint, trying to make them out against the fading light. They're caravel ships, the workhorses of the Portuguese age of discovery, and they're looking substantial. Loaded, probably. And definitely heading your way. Now, you might be thinking, oh great, more neighbors. Maybe they brought snacks. Bless your optimistic heart. These aren't exactly the bring a casserole type of neighbors. See, the Portuguese, by this point in history, were basically the rock stars of exploration. They were tearing up the Indian Ocean, charting new routes, establishing trade outposts faster than you can say, spice monopoly. They'd already been all over the place, Africa, India, the Moluccas. They were like the early adopters of globalization, but instead of iPhones, they were peddling gunpowder and religious conversions. And, spoiler alert, they're pretty good at what they do. Your first encounter is civil, surprisingly so. You meet with the captain, a stern-faced fellow with a meticulously groomed beard and eyes that seem to weigh you up like a particularly disappointing piece of meat. He speaks in heavily accented, vaguely condescending tones. He's all about trade, he assures you. A mutually beneficial exchange of goods. You know, the kind where they get all the valuable stuff, and you get glass beads and a pat on the head. He's fascinated by the resources your little settlement holds. Timber, spices, maybe even gold. And he's very interested in converting the locals to Christianity. Because, you know, saving souls is always a good excuse for a land grab. Or so they thought. You try to negotiate, to protect your fledgling community. But you quickly realize you're outmatched. They have guns. You have a really nice view. It's hard to argue with a cannon. The Portuguese establish a trading post. A small one, at first. Just a few buildings, a warehouse, a church. But it grows. They bring in more ships, more people, more influence. Slowly, subtly, your world starts to change. You see your neighbors, the indigenous people, interacting with the newcomers. Some are curious, eager to learn new skills and access foreign goods. Others are wary, resentful of the intrusion. There's a tension in the air, a low hum of unease that vibrates through the very soil beneath your feet. You start to hear stories about those mutually beneficial trade deals that leave the locals empty-handed. And then there are the conversions. The Portuguese priests are relentless. They preach fire and brimstone, promising eternal damnation to anyone who refuses to accept their God. They build churches on sacred sites, replacing ancient beliefs with new doctrines. It's all very thorough. You try to stay neutral, to navigate this increasingly complex landscape. You try to appease both sides, to maintain peace. But it's a precarious balancing act, like trying to juggle flaming pineapples on a tightrope. It's only a matter of time before something drops. One day, you witness a public flogging. A local man, accused of stealing from the Portuguese, is tied to a post and whipped. The scene is brutal, shocking. It's a stark reminder of the power imbalance, the casual cruelty that lies beneath the veneer of civilization. You try to intervene, to reason with the Portuguese authorities. But they dismiss you, remind you that you are a guest in their, well, they're increasingly their land. You realize that your good intentions, your naive belief in diplomacy, are utterly useless. You're just a pawn in a much larger game. Historians still argue whether Portuguese colonization was primarily driven by religious zeal or economic greed. The truth, of course, is probably a messy combination of both. It's rarely ever just one thing, is it? Like, is that stomach ache you have from the questionable street meat you ate last night or just pure existential dread? Probably a bit of both, right? Speaking of interesting historical debates. Did you know there's a theory that the Portuguese were actually secretly searching for the mythical land of Prester John, a legendary Christian king who supposedly ruled a kingdom somewhere in Asia? Now, mainstream historians usually dismiss this as a fringe idea. But wouldn't it be wild if they were sailing around the world, conquering territories, all in the hopes of finding a dude they made up? Like if the Vikings were actually just trying to find Valhalla gift shop. That flogging incident, it changes you. It hardens you. You realize that you can't stand idly by while your neighbors are exploited and oppressed. You need to take a stand, to fight for what you believe in. But how? You're just one person, armed with nothing but your wits and a slightly rusty cutlass. You start meeting with other settlers, people who share your concerns. You talk in hushed tones, in secret locations, plotting your resistance. It's all very dramatic, like a historical spy movie, but with less budget and significantly worse costumes. You begin to learn the local languages, to understand the culture and customs of the indigenous people. You realize that they have a rich history, a complex society that predates the arrival of the Portuguese by centuries. They're not just savages waiting to be civilized. They're people with their own beliefs, their own traditions, their own way of life. You start to see them as allies, as potential partners in the fight against the colonial oppressors. One evening, while you're enjoying a quiet moment, a local elder shares stories of ancient spirits connected to the land, tales of mystical power that reside within the very trees and rivers. He tells you about the importance of respecting the natural world, of living in harmony with the environment. You listen intently, captivated by his words. You wonder if there's more to this land than you initially thought. This is when you stumble across an ancient map, hidden deep within a forgotten temple. The map depicts secret passages, hidden waterways, and forgotten strongholds. It's a treasure trove of information, a potential key to unlocking the region's strategic secrets. You realize that this map could be invaluable in your fight against the Portuguese. You start to organize. You train your fellow settlers in basic combat skills. You forge alliances with local tribes. You gather weapons and supplies. You're building a resistance movement, brick by painstaking brick. You know the risks. You know that if you're caught, you'll face severe consequences. But you're no longer willing to live under the thumb of the Portuguese. You're ready to fight for your freedom, for your community, for the future of this land. You know this is going to be a long and difficult struggle. The Portuguese are powerful, well-equipped, and ruthless. But you have something they don't. You have the support of the local people, the knowledge of the land, and the burning desire for freedom. And as you stare out into the darkness, at the twinkling lights of the Portuguese ships anchored in the harbor, you know that the time for talking is over. The time for action has begun. You take a deep breath and start getting ready. Oh, and just a little something I learned. The Portuguese explorer Ferdinand Magellan, who you might know for leading the first expedition to circumnavigate the globe, was actually Portuguese but sailed for Spain because he was having some salary disputes with the Portuguese king. Talk about a messy breakup. One last silly thought to leave you with, if the Portuguese were really all about spreading the word of God, why didn't they just invent email? Think of all the time they would have saved. Okay, friend, you got this. Seriously, you do. You might feel like a tiny ship tossed about on the ocean, but you're steering your own course. Now, go get some sleep. We'll see what tomorrow brings. Sweet dreams, or, strategic battle plans. Whatever works. Okay, settle in, get comfy. Maybe grab a blanket, or a cup of something soothing. We're diving back into the story of Nzinga, Queen of Ndongo and Matamba, but this time, you're right there with her. Deep breath. Ready? You trudge along the dusty path, the Angolan sun beating down on your head. It's relentlessly hot, even though it's still relatively early. Beads of sweat trickle down your back, plastering your tunic to your skin. You can practically taste the dust, a gritty film coating your teeth. The air smells of dry earth and something vaguely musty. Like old books left out in the rain. Charming. This is it. Nzinga's first major diplomatic mission. A journey to Luanda, the Portuguese stronghold. Think of it as your study abroad program, but with way higher stakes. Your queen, and let's be honest, she's your queen now too, isn't she? Has tasked you with accompanying her, observing, learning. She believes you have a keen eye and an even keener ear, which, let's face it, is probably code for, you're less likely to accidentally insult a foreign dignitary than some of these other knuckleheads. Good luck with that. Remember that Portugal was one of the first European powers to truly embrace overseas exploration and colonization. And they were really good at it. Mostly for them, of course. Not so much for the people they encountered. This sets the stage for some interesting interactions. You glance around at the rest of the entourage. Soldiers, advisors, servants, all moving with a weary determination. Nzinga herself rides ahead, regal and composed, seemingly unaffected by the heat and discomfort. Or maybe she's just really good at hiding it. Either way, you admire her. You try to emulate her posture, pulling your shoulders back and lifting your chin. You probably just look constipated. The Portuguese, you've heard, are sticklers for protocol. You hope someone remembered to pack the good beads. You'd hate for a trade negotiation to fall apart over a perceived lack of sparkly ornamentation. Wouldn't you? Speaking of important things. Did you know that Nzinga was not just a queen, but Angola? Think of it like, a title that blends royalty with spiritual authority. Almost like a warrior priestess. So, yeah, don't mess. You pass a baobab tree. Its thick, swollen trunk looks like it's been planted upside down, its spindly branches reaching towards the sky like grasping fingers. Someone told you that baobab trees can live for over 1,000 years. It's a humbling thought, especially considering you're pretty sure you left a carton of milk in the sun before this journey began, and it's already starting to weigh on your soul. As you near Luanda, you start to see signs of Portuguese influence. Buildings made of stone, not just mud and thatch. The air smells of salt and something else. Something unfamiliar. Oh, it's probably just unwashed sailors. The city itself is a bustling port, ships bobbing in the harbor like giant seabirds. People from all over the world, or at least, all over their world, throng the streets. European merchants, African traders, soldiers, missionaries, all crammed together in a chaotic mix. You stick close to Nzinga's entourage, feeling a little overwhelmed. Like you're at Disney World, but with more muskets. You enter the governor's palace. Its stark white walls feel cold and unwelcoming. Everything is so angular. So different from the curves and textures you're used to. The furniture is heavy and ornate, the portraits on the walls stern and imposing. You feel like you've walked into a museum. Or a dentist's office. Nzinga greets the Portuguese governor with a calm and measured grace. She speaks through an interpreter, her voice clear and strong. You watch her closely, trying to decipher the nuances of her words and her expressions. She's an absolute masterclass in diplomatic theater, isn't she? Historians still argue whether Nzinga initially converted to Christianity as a genuine expression of faith or as a strategic political maneuver. It certainly complicated things. She took the name Ana de Souza, which probably made filling out paperwork easier. The negotiations begin. It's a slow, drawn-out process, full of posturing and haggling. The Portuguese want slaves, land, and control over trade routes. Nzinga wants to protect her people and maintain her sovereignty. It's a classic power struggle, and you're right in the middle of it. Fantastic. You observe as Nzinga uses every tool at her disposal. Wit, charm, intelligence, and a healthy dose of, well, let's call it, strategic ambiguity. She's like a chess master, always thinking several moves ahead. Except instead of chess pieces, she's moving people. There's a moment during the negotiations that sticks with you. The Portuguese governor, in a display of arrogant condescension, gestures towards the floor and invites Nzinga to sit on it, as if she were a supplicant begging for favor. You brace yourself, ready for an explosion of royal rage. But instead, Nzinga simply smiles. Without missing a beat, she motions to one of her servants, who immediately kneels down and offers their back as a seat. Nzinga sits, perched regally on her impromptu throne, and continues the negotiations as if nothing unusual had happened. The governor's face flushes red. He looks disconcerted. Like someone just swapped his brandy for prune juice. It's a small gesture, but it speaks volumes. Nzinga refuses to be demeaned. She refuses to be treated as anything less than an equal. She maintains her dignity, even in the face of blatant disrespect. You feel a surge of pride. That's your queen. Speaking of unusual seating arrangements, some accounts suggest that Nzinga insisted on being addressed as a king, adopting male attire and surrounding herself with male concubines. Now, that's what I call commitment to the bit. After days of negotiations, a treaty is finally signed. It's not perfect, but it's a start. Nzinga has secured some concessions from the Portuguese, including the recognition of her sovereignty and the release of some of her people who had been enslaved. It's a victory, albeit a fragile one. You feel a sense of relief wash over you, followed by a healthy dose of apprehension. This is just the beginning. As you leave Luanda, you look back at the city. It's a symbol of Portuguese power, of European ambition, of the insatiable hunger for land and resources. But it's also a symbol of resistance. Of Nzinga's unwavering determination to protect her people and her kingdom. On the journey back, Nzinga's mood is pensive. You try to gauge what she's thinking, but her face is an absolute mask. It's actually kind of intimidating. Did you know that Nzinga was a skilled military strategist? She was known for her innovative tactics and her ability to inspire her troops. She even formed alliances with other African kingdoms to fight against the Portuguese. You learn later, in hushed tones around the campfire, that the treaty is viewed by many within her court as a temporary measure. A pause before the real battle. A chance to regroup, rearm, and prepare for the inevitable conflict. You can't help but feel a little thrill of excitement, mixed with a large dollop of terror. Back in Ndongo, life slowly returns to normal. But you're different now. You've seen the world, or at least a small, very tense corner of it. You've witnessed Nzinga's diplomatic skills firsthand. You've learned about the complexities of power, the dangers of colonialism, and the importance of resistance. You carry these lessons with you, etched in your mind like scars. You realize that you're not just a passive observer in this story. You're a participant. You have a role to play. And you're determined to play it well. The sun sets, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The crickets chirp, their song a soothing lullaby. You close your eyes, feeling grateful for this moment of peace. But you know that it won't last. The storm is coming. And you're ready for it. More or less. Before we wrap up completely, and this might sound really strange, but there's a rumor that Nzinga was actually a vegetarian. A warrior queen vegetarian. Talk about defying expectations. And that's it for today. You've survived your first diplomatic mission. You've seen a queen negotiate with colonial powers. You've learned a thing or two about politics, power, and the importance of having a good servant to act as an impromptu seat. Okay, settle in, friend. Let's keep tracing this wild path, winding our way through the thick undergrowth of Angolan history. Comfy? Good. Deep breaths. That's it. You trudge onward, the sun beating down with the enthusiasm of 1,000 tropical hair dryers. The dust clings to your skin like a lovesick gecko. You're following the tracks, metaphorically, of course. You're probably sitting in a comfy chair right now, maybe with a beverage. But in your mind, you're there, right? You're tracing the steps of Angolan leaders, hoping to understand the tangled web of alliances and betrayals that defined their struggle for independence. The air is thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something vaguely metallic. Probably just your imagination. Maybe. You push aside a curtain of vines, and the story unfolds a little more. It's the early 1970s, and the fight for Angolan independence is reaching a fever pitch. The Portuguese, clinging desperately to their empire, are feeling the pressure. Even they have to know their grip is loosening. It's like trying to hold onto a greased watermelon at a water park, isn't it? Slippery. Inevitably going to escape. The armed struggle is taking its toll, both on their resources and their morale. Meanwhile, the three major Angolan liberation movements, the MPLA, UNITA, and the FNLA, are vying for power, each with their own ideologies, leaders, and external backers. It's less of a united front and more of a really awkward three-legged race where everyone's trying to trip each other. And then, a flicker of hope. A chance for a peaceful resolution. The Portuguese government, weakened by the Carnation Revolution in 1974, a military coup that, surprisingly, involved soldiers placing carnations in the barrels of their guns, it was very avant-garde, even for a revolution, begins to explore the possibility of a negotiated settlement. The smell of gunpowder is slowly being replaced by, well, the scent of political maneuvering. A treaty is proposed, a beacon in the darkness. You lean in, hopeful. The Luanda Treaty. It sounds almost promising, doesn't it? You're present as representatives from the three liberation movements, as well as the Portuguese government, gather in Alvar, Portugal, in January 1975. The atmosphere is tense but cautiously optimistic. There's the rustle of papers, the hushed whispers, the subtle throat clearing that accompanies any high-stakes negotiation. It's a bit like waiting in line at the DMV, but with slightly more existential dread. Everyone knows this could be a turning point, a chance to finally break free from colonial rule and build a new future for Angola. The treaty promises a transitional government, power sharing, and, eventually, free and fair elections. It's a blueprint for peace, a roadmap to independence. For a moment, you allow yourself to believe that it might actually work. You can almost taste the liberation in the air, a heady mix of freedom and possibility. You see the hopeful faces of Angolans, dreaming of a future where their children won't have to live under the yoke of colonialism. You see the exhaustion in the eyes of the Portuguese soldiers, weary of war and longing to return home. A new dawn seems to be breaking. The treaty is signed. Applause crackles in the room, quickly followed by more throat clearing, just to keep things even. The champagne corks pop. The future, for a fleeting moment, seems bright. You breathe out, slowly. This is it. This is the turning point. The culmination of years of struggle, of sacrifice, of unwavering determination. The scent of metallic dread begins to dissipate. Except. It doesn't quite work out that way, does it? If it did, this would be a very short and boring story. Like a really, really slow elevator ride. Almost immediately, the cracks begin to appear. Distrust, simmering beneath the surface for years, erupts into open conflict. The fragile coalition government, envisioned by the Luanda Treaty, begins to crumble. Each faction, driven by its own ambitions and fueled by external support, starts to jostle for control. The MPLA, backed by the Soviet Union and Cuba, consolidates its power in Luanda, the capital city. UNITA, supported by South Africa and the United States, establishes its stronghold in the south. The FNLA, initially allied with UNITA, struggles to maintain its position, weakened by internal divisions and waning support. The three-legged race just turned into a free-for-all in a mud pit. The streets of Luanda, once filled with cautious optimism, become battlegrounds. Gunfire echoes through the night. The city is divided, fractured along political lines. Civilians are caught in the crossfire, their dreams of peace shattered. The Luanda Treaty, once a symbol of hope, becomes a bitter reminder of broken promises. You can almost hear the mournful strains of a fado, a Portuguese lament, drifting on the wind. It's a soundtrack to shattered dreams. You stumble over a discarded newspaper, the headlines screaming of violence and betrayal. The ink smudges on your fingers, staining them with the grim reality of the situation. The transitional government, paralyzed by infighting, proves incapable of maintaining order. The Portuguese, eager to wash their hands of the whole mess, begin to withdraw their troops, leaving a power vacuum in their wake. It's like leaving a group of toddlers unsupervised in a candy store. Chaos is inevitable. Historians still argue whether the Luanda Treaty was doomed from the start. Was it a naive attempt to reconcile irreconcilable differences? Or was it a genuine opportunity for peace, squandered by the ambition and greed of the warring factions? You ponder these questions, your brow furrowed in concentration. It's a complex puzzle, with no easy answers. Maybe the problem was simply that none of the parties ever really intended to share power. Perhaps they all saw the treaty as a stepping stone to achieving their own ultimate goals, a temporary truce in a long and bitter war. You see evidence of foreign interference everywhere. Cold War rivalries play out on Angolan soil, as the United States and the Soviet Union pour weapons and resources into the conflict, backing their respective proxies. South Africa, driven by its own strategic interests, intervenes militarily, supporting UNITA in its fight against the MPLA. Cuba, on the other hand, sends thousands of troops to bolster the MPLA's forces, turning Angola into a proxy battleground for the superpowers. It's like watching a really bad chess game played with human lives. The betrayal stings. The promise of peace, so tantalizingly close, slips through your fingers like sand. The Luanda Treaty, once a symbol of hope, becomes a symbol of disillusionment. It's a harsh lesson in the brutal realities of power politics, a reminder that even the most well-intentioned agreements can be undone by ambition, greed, and external interference. And you know, the really sad part is, the betrayal wasn't just of a treaty, but of a people. A whole nation yearning for peace. You sink down onto a dusty rock, the weight of the story pressing down on you. The sun is beginning to set, casting long shadows across the landscape. The scent of metallic dread is back, stronger than ever. You wonder if there will ever be a time when Angola can truly escape its past, when the cycle of violence and betrayal will finally be broken. It's a heavy thought, a burden to carry. What was that quote? Oh yes. The past is never dead. It's not even past. True. True indeed. And you're left to wonder just how many more broken treaties, and shattered dreams, it will take before peace finally finds its way to this war-torn land. You know, this reminds me of the time I tried to make a soufflé. Looked great, promised so much, and then, deflated. Just like the Luanda Treaty. Maybe next time, they should have tried a cake. Harder to deflate, you know. Alright, so things have gotten a little spicy. The Portuguese are not exactly throwing welcome home parties for you, and Luanda is about as hospitable as a cactus convention. I mean, seriously, who thought arming mercenaries and demanding tribute was a solid long-term relationship strategy? Some people just don't get it. So, pack your bags, metaphorically, because you're probably traveling light, and let's get out of Dodge. Or, Luanda. You trudge through the dense Angolan bush, your sandals slapping against the dusty earth. The sun beats down with the intensity of 1,000 disappointed parents, and the air hangs thick and humid, clinging to you like an overenthusiastic fan at a K-pop concert. Sweat trickles down your brow, blurring your vision. You wonder if waterproof mascara was a thing back then, and then immediately chide yourself for such frivolous thoughts. Priorities, right? Survival is the new black. You press on, your loyal followers, what's left of them, flanking you like diligent, if slightly bedraggled, bodyguards. You notice the subtle shifts in the forest, the way the light filters through the leaves, the unique scent of the earth, the calls of unfamiliar birds. It's a stark contrast to the relative, and now decidedly hostile, civilization you just left behind. Funny, isn't it, how sometimes the most dangerous place is the one with the fancy buildings? The journey is grueling. You ford rivers teeming with, who knows what? Hopefully just fish. You scale rocky hills that seem to mock your every step, and you navigate treacherous ravines that threaten to swallow you whole. The nights are cold and filled with the eerie sounds of the African wilderness. You huddle around crackling fires, sharing stories and meager rations. You try desperately to keep morale high, but even your legendary charisma is starting to feel the strain. You tell yourself you're basically a historical Girl Scout troop leader, minus the cookies. But you press on. You have to. Because somewhere, at the end of this arduous trek, lies Matamba. And Matamba, hopefully, is the answer. After weeks of relentless travel, a glimmer of hope finally appears on the horizon. You spot it first, a lush valley nestled amidst rolling hills, a verdant oasis in the otherwise unforgiving landscape. As you approach, you begin to make out the outlines of a fortified settlement, sturdy wooden palisades protecting a cluster of thatched roof huts. This is it. This is Matamba. You arrive, weary but determined. The people of Matamba, a diverse group of Mbunda refugees and sympathetic local tribes, greet you with a mixture of curiosity and respect. They have heard whispers of your exploits, your defiance of the Portuguese, your unwavering commitment to your people. They see in you a leader, a protector, a symbol of hope. And you, in turn, see in them the potential for a new beginning. You immediately set to work, organizing the settlement, establishing defenses, and forging alliances with neighboring tribes. You know that the Portuguese will eventually come looking for you. It's inevitable, really. They aren't exactly known for their forgive and forget attitude. But this time, you will be ready. You train your warriors in the art of guerrilla warfare, teaching them to use the terrain to their advantage, to ambush the enemy, and to strike swiftly and decisively. You establish a network of spies and informants, keeping a close eye on Portuguese movements and gathering intelligence about their plans. You even recruit runaway slaves and disgruntled Portuguese soldiers, offering them freedom and a chance to fight for a just cause. Hey, everyone loves a good redemption arc, right? Life in Matamba is a constant struggle. Food is scarce, resources are limited, and the threat of Portuguese attack looms large. But you refuse to be discouraged. You rally your people, reminding them of what they are fighting for, their freedom, their dignity, their very existence. You become a symbol of resistance, a beacon of hope in a dark and oppressive world. Now, here's a mainstream historical fact for you: Nzinga formed an alliance with the Mbangala, a fierce group of warriors known for their cannibalistic rituals. Yeah, that's right. Cannibalism. It was definitely a different time. Some historians believe the Mbangala were essentially mercenaries, while others suggest their practices were deeply rooted in spiritual beliefs. Historians still argue whether Nzinga was aware of the full extent of their practices, or if she simply saw them as a means to an end. But the alliance was crucial in bolstering her military strength and solidifying her position in Matamba. You're now running with cannibals. Fun times. And now for our quirky tidbit. Queen Nzinga was known to have dressed as a man and insisted on being addressed as a king, not a queen. She even maintained a harem of male concubines who dressed as women. Talk about challenging gender norms. It's a little, gender is a construct, tear it apart, before it's time. You lead by example, participating in all aspects of life in Matamba, from tending the fields to leading raids against Portuguese outposts. You are a warrior, a diplomat, a leader, and a symbol. You are the embodiment of resistance. You are Nzinga. The Portuguese, predictably, are not thrilled with your newfound power base. They launch several expeditions against Matamba, hoping to crush your rebellion and restore their control over the region. But you are ready for them. You know their tactics, their strengths, and their weaknesses. You use your knowledge of the terrain to your advantage, ambushing their troops, cutting off their supply lines, and harassing them at every turn. One particularly daring raid involves infiltrating a Portuguese fort disguised as a group of traders. You and your warriors manage to overpower the guards, seize a large cache of weapons and ammunition, and escape back to Matamba before the Portuguese can mount a counterattack. It's basically a historical Ocean's 11, except instead of stealing money, you're stealing freedom. The battles are fierce and bloody. You witness firsthand the horrors of war, the brutality of the Portuguese, and the resilience of your own people. You lose friends, allies, and loved ones. But you refuse to surrender. You refuse to let the Portuguese break your spirit. You fight on, fueled by your unwavering belief in the righteousness of your cause. Historians still debate the effectiveness of Nzinga's guerrilla tactics. Some argue that they were instrumental in slowing down Portuguese expansion and preserving Angolan independence, while others claim that they were ultimately unsustainable in the face of superior Portuguese firepower. It's a classic debate, quality versus quantity, cunning versus brute force. The Portuguese, frustrated by your resistance, resort to increasingly brutal tactics. They burn villages, destroy crops, and enslave anyone they can get their hands on. They even attempt to assassinate you, sending spies and assassins into Matamba in disguise. But you are too clever for them. You see through their deceptions and turn their own tactics against them. One particularly close call involves a Portuguese assassin posing as a healer. He manages to get close to you, but just as he is about to strike, one of your loyal bodyguards intervenes, sacrificing himself to save your life. You are devastated by the loss, but you use it as fuel to redouble your efforts. Now, let's lighten things up with a little joke. What do you call a Portuguese soldier who's been ambushed in the Angolan bush? Lost. Okay, I know, I can hear the groans from here. I promise, they'll get better, eventually. As the war drags on, both sides begin to feel the strain. The Portuguese are stretched thin, their resources depleted, and their morale flagging. Your people are weary of fighting, but they remain steadfast in their determination to resist. You realize that you cannot defeat the Portuguese outright, but you can make it so costly for them to maintain their presence in Angola that they eventually decide to leave. You begin to focus on diplomacy, sending emissaries to other European powers, seeking their support in your struggle against the Portuguese. You argue that your cause is not just about Angolan independence, but about the freedom of all people from oppression and exploitation. You are essentially playing the game of global politics, and you're actually doing a pretty good job of it. During this time, Nzinga also declared herself a follower of Christianity, in order to convince other Christian countries to support her cause. This was a classic case of realpolitik, and some historians believe she was only paying lip service to Christianity. You cleverly leverage alliances with rival European powers like the Dutch, who are eager to undermine Portuguese influence. You provide them with trading opportunities and strategic advantages in exchange for weapons, supplies, and diplomatic support. It's a win-win situation, except, for the Portuguese. And here's another joke. What did the Portuguese say to Queen Nzinga? Nothing, they were too busy running away. Cricket sounds alright, I'll work on the delivery. The Portuguese, facing increasing pressure from both within and without, eventually decide to negotiate. After years of bloody conflict, they offer you a treaty recognizing your independence and guaranteeing the sovereignty of Matamba. It's not a complete victory, but it's a major step forward. You sign the treaty, knowing that it is just a temporary truce. You realize that the Portuguese will likely try to undermine your power and reclaim their territory at some point in the future. But for now, you have secured a period of peace and stability for your people. You use this time to rebuild Matamba, to strengthen your defenses, and to consolidate your power. You implement reforms to improve the lives of your people, promoting agriculture, trade, and education. You even establish a system of justice based on fairness and equality. You're basically building a new society from scratch. Here is a fringe fact: some historical accounts claim Nzinga possessed supernatural abilities, including the ability to shape-shift and control the weather. While likely embellished, these tales demonstrate the immense respect and awe she inspired among her people. As you reflect on your journey, you realize how far you have come. You were once a princess, a diplomat, a pawn in a political game. Now, you are a warrior, a queen, a symbol of resistance. You have faced incredible challenges and overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. You have defied the Portuguese, forged alliances, and built a new nation. You have become a legend. And you've only got, 30 more years to go. Talk about longevity in leadership. I think that's probably a good place to, hold on. I forgot my third joke. Okay, so what do you call a queen who's always on the run? Nzinga. Yeah, I know. I'm not going to quit my day job. Now, that's all for tonight. Okay, settle in, friend. Let's keep going, shall we? You're not quite asleep yet, are you? Good. Because things are about to get diplomatic. And maybe a little stabby. Mostly diplomatic, though. We're building alliances, remember? Not exactly the sort of thing you can do whilst slumbering. Unless you're sleep-talking peace treaties. Now that's a superpower. You find yourself, yet again, at another dusty crossroads. This time, though, the air is thick with anticipation. Conspiracy. Maybe it's just the curry spices from that street vendor you passed earlier. Either way, the weight of responsibility is really starting to settle in, huh? The fight against the Portuguese isn't a solo mission, a one-man or woman army kind of deal. No, you're gonna need friends. And maybe a few well-placed bribes. Look, alliances are complicated. You trudge towards the nearest village elder, or chieftain, or whoever seems to be in charge. You notice he's sitting under an enormous banyan tree, a symbol of, stability and long life. Or maybe it's just the only shady spot in town. He's surrounded by advisors who all look like they've seen a few too many sunsets. You clear your throat, the sound surprisingly loud in the otherwise quiet village square. All eyes turn to you. Great. Time to be charming. You launch into your pitch. You explain the Portuguese threat, their insatiable hunger for trade routes, their aggressive expansion, their questionable facial hair choices. Okay, maybe you don't mention the last one. You paint a picture of a future where the entire region is under foreign control, resources drained, traditions forgotten. You appeal to their sense of patriotism, their love of freedom, their desire to keep those pesky tax collectors away. And you throw in a compliment or two about their impressive collection of ceramic pots. Flattery works, even in the 17th century. Interestingly enough, pottery does play a critical role in history. Think about it, shards of pottery are often some of the only tangible evidence we have about past civilizations. They tell us about their technology, their art, their trade routes, even what they ate. A single piece of broken pottery can be a treasure trove of information for archaeologists. So, yeah, complimenting the pots wasn't just a cheap tactic, it was historically relevant. The elder listens intently, stroking his chin, occasionally exchanging glances with his advisors. You can't quite read his expression. Is he skeptical? Amused? Bored? Maybe he's just thinking about lunch. Finally, he speaks, his voice raspy but firm. He lays out his conditions: military support, trade agreements, a guarantee of autonomy. It's a tough negotiation, but you're ready for it. You counter with your own offers, concede a few points, and stand firm on others. It's a dance of power and persuasion, a delicate balancing act. You feel a bead of sweat trickling down your back. This is exhausting. But crucial. This whole alliance-building thing can feel pretty cloak and dagger, right? Well, you wouldn't be wrong. Historically, alliances were often forged in secret, with clandestine meetings and coded messages. Think of all those spy movies you've seen. That's basically international relations boiled down to entertainment. And while we're on the subject, can we just acknowledge how ridiculously convoluted some historical treaties were? Clauses and subclauses and riders that stretched on for pages, all written in excruciatingly formal language. It's a wonder anyone actually understood what they were signing. It's like reading IKEA instructions, but with potentially deadly consequences. After what feels like an eternity, a deal is struck. A formal agreement is signed, sealed, and probably delivered by a very tired messenger pigeon. You've secured an alliance. One down, several to go. You feel a surge of relief, followed by a wave of anticipation for the next round of negotiations. Time to move on. This alliance is going to prove invaluable. It won't just provide soldiers, it will open up new supply routes, offer strategic advantages, and send a clear message to the Portuguese: you're not messing with just one village, you're messing with an entire coalition. Speaking of strategy, did you know that the use of military formations is ancient? Like, really ancient. We're talking about the Sumerians in the 3rd millennium BCE. They used phalanxes of heavily armed infantry, which later inspired the Greeks, and the rest, as they say, is history. From the Roman legions to the Napoleonic Grande Army, military formations have been a key component of warfare for centuries. And what about the element of surprise? So valuable. Historians still argue whether Sun Tzu was real, or just a literary creation, but his Art of War is required reading for anyone interested in military strategy. Even today. It's full of timeless advice, like, know your enemy, choose your battles wisely, and never bring a knife to a gunfight. Okay, maybe not that last one. But here's a quirky historical tidbit for you. Did you ever hear of the Great Emu War of 1932? Yep, you heard that right. The Australian military was actually deployed to combat a massive population of emus that were wreaking havoc on farmland. And they lost. The emus were too fast, too agile, and too darn numerous. It was a complete and utter humiliation for the Australian army. A real bird-brained idea, you might say. As you move on to the next village, you contemplate the logistical challenges ahead. Armies don't just magically appear, fully equipped and ready to fight. They need food, weapons, training, and a whole lot of coordination. You start thinking about supply lines, recruitment strategies, and communication networks. It's a monumental task, but you're not alone. You have allies now. And together, you're a force to be reckoned with. One of the most interesting things about building a military force is the diversity of motivations that drive people to join. Some are driven by patriotism, others by the promise of adventure or loot, and some, sadly, by desperation. Throughout history, armies have been composed of all sorts of characters, from noble knights to hardened mercenaries to reluctant conscripts. It's a real melting pot of humanity, all united by a common goal: victory. Or, at the very least, survival. You spend the next few weeks traveling from village to village, negotiating treaties, forging alliances, and building your military strength. You encounter resistance, setbacks, and betrayals. But you also find unexpected allies, moments of camaraderie, and glimpses of hope. You witness the resilience of the people, their unwavering determination to resist the Portuguese. And you realize that you're not just building an army, you're building a movement. A movement for freedom, for independence, for the right to determine your own destiny. You implement a training program for your soldiers, teaching them new tactics, improving their skills, and instilling in them a sense of discipline. You establish a network of spies to gather intelligence on the Portuguese. You stockpile weapons and ammunition. You prepare for war. It's a long and arduous process, but you're making progress. Slowly but surely, the tide is turning. The Portuguese may have the superior firepower, but you have something they don't, the will to fight for your homeland. You know, the history of warfare is just fascinating, albeit often horrifying. Think about the evolution of weaponry, from swords and spears to guns and cannons to tanks and nuclear bombs. It's a constant arms race, with each new invention leading to a counter-invention. And what about the psychological impact of war? The trauma, the grief, the lasting scars. It's a reminder that conflict is never a simple or straightforward thing. But alas, it's also a recurring theme throughout human history. And now for a little levity. What do you call a fish with no eyes? FSH. I'll show myself out. But here's something that might actually make you think. Did you know that some historians believe that the development of agriculture actually led to warfare? The argument is that agriculture created surpluses of food and resources, which in turn led to competition and conflict over those resources. It's a controversial theory, but it raises some interesting questions about the relationship between civilization and violence. As the sun sets, casting long shadows across the land, you feel a sense of both exhaustion and accomplishment. You've built alliances, strengthened your military, and prepared for the inevitable clash with the Portuguese. You're ready for whatever comes next. Almost. You still need a good night's sleep. I think that's quite enough for tonight, friend. We've accomplished a lot. The alliances are forming, the troops are training, and the Portuguese, well, they're probably just having dinner. Let them eat. Tomorrow, we fight. Alright, settle in, let's get comfy. Imagine you're nestled under a woven blanket, maybe sipping some chamomile tea. We're about to delve into the world of Queen Nzinga, and believe me, her life was anything but chamomile. You find yourself deep in the Angolan bush. The air hangs heavy, thick with humidity. Sweat trickles down your back as you hack through the dense undergrowth. You're not exactly dressed for the occasion, are you? Probably should have worn something other than those pristine white sneakers. Now they're caked in mud, and that mosquito buzzing around your ear is really testing your patience. This isn't exactly Club Med, is it? But this is where Nzinga, the queen of the Mbunda people, waged her relentless war against the Portuguese. You squint, trying to see through the dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy. The sounds of the forest are all around you, the chirping of unseen insects, the rustling of leaves, the distant calls of monkeys. It's peaceful, in a way, until you remember you're basically in the middle of a war zone. Now, Nzinga wasn't just sitting around waiting for the Portuguese to bring her tea and crumpets. Oh no. She was a brilliant strategist, a master of guerrilla warfare. Think of her as the Sun Tzu of 17th century Angola. She understood that she couldn't beat the Portuguese in a straight-up, head-to-head battle. They had superior weaponry, better training, and, frankly, a lot more resources. So, she had to get creative. You're trudging alongside a group of Nzinga's soldiers. They move with a quiet confidence, their bare feet silent on the forest floor. They know this terrain intimately. They know where to find water, where to find shelter, and, most importantly, where to lay an ambush. You, on the other hand, are just trying not to trip over a root. Nzinga's tactics relied heavily on surprise. You and the soldiers might be hidden in the tall grass 1 minute, and the next you're swarming out to attack a Portuguese supply convoy. You'd strike quickly, inflicting as much damage as possible, and then melt back into the forest before the Portuguese could react. Think of it as a highly organized game of whack-a-mole, but with more stabbing. One of her favorite tricks was to use the terrain to her advantage. She knew the Angolan landscape like the back of her hand. She used the rivers, the mountains, and the dense forests to create natural barriers and choke points. She'd lure the Portuguese into ambushes, trapping them in narrow valleys or forcing them to cross dangerous rivers. It was like playing chess with the land itself. You know, except instead of a tiny little chessboard, it's Angola. You stumble again, catching yourself on a thorny bush. Ouch! That's going to leave a mark. You hear a muffled chuckle from one of the soldiers. They're probably used to seeing clumsy foreigners blundering around in their territory. Maybe they have a betting pool going on how long you'll last out here. Now, here's a mainstream historical fact for you: Nzinga offered asylum to runaway slaves and Portuguese deserters. It wasn't just a humanitarian gesture, it was a brilliant military strategy. These new recruits bolstered her army and gave her valuable insights into the enemy's tactics and weaknesses. It was like getting insider information on your opponent's playbook. She even adopted some of the Portuguese military techniques herself, adapting them to her own guerrilla style. Smart, right? She also understood the importance of psychological warfare. You see, she wasn't just fighting a physical battle, she was fighting a battle for hearts and minds. She spread rumors among the Portuguese ranks, exaggerating her strength and spreading fear. She used spies to gather intelligence and sow discord. She even employed witch doctors to cast spells and curses on her enemies. Okay, maybe the witch doctor part is a little fringe. But hey, whatever works, right? Historians still argue whether Nzinga's adoption of Christianity was a genuine conversion or a political maneuver. She had previously adopted Christianity but abandoned it when it suited her political needs. The Portuguese, of course, were devout Catholics, and Nzinga knew that by converting, she could gain their trust and improve her standing with them. It was like saying, hey, we're all on the same team now. Of course, she was secretly plotting their downfall the whole time. A little bit cheeky, if you ask me. You're starting to get the hang of moving quietly through the forest, even if your ankles are covered in scratches. You can almost feel the weight of history pressing down on you, the weight of Nzinga's struggle, the weight of her people's resilience. It's a powerful feeling. It's almost enough to make you forget about that mosquito, almost. And then there's the quirky tidbit. Apparently, Nzinga had a harem of male concubines who were dressed as women and referred to as her wives. They served as her bodyguards and carried out various domestic duties. Now, that's a power move. Some speculate this was a symbol of her authority, others believe it was a way to subvert gender roles and demonstrate her dominance. Whatever the reason, it certainly raised a few eyebrows back in Europe. You can imagine the gossip. Did you hear about Queen Nzinga and her wives? She also forged alliances with other African kingdoms, uniting them against the common enemy. She understood that strength lay in numbers. She rallied the disparate tribes and clans under her banner, creating a formidable force that the Portuguese could not ignore. You might even say she was the original coalition builder. If only modern-day politicians were as effective. You can see the remnants of one of Nzinga's fortified villages. It's little more than a clearing in the forest now, but you can still make out the outlines of the defensive walls and the thatched roof huts. This was a safe haven, a place where Nzinga's people could find refuge from the war. It was also a base of operations for her guerrilla fighters, a place to rest, resupply, and plan their next attack. Sort of like a super-secret, jungle-themed hideout. Now, let's be honest, Nzinga's war wasn't always pretty. Guerrilla warfare is, by its very nature, a brutal and unforgiving business. There were ambushes, assassinations, and acts of sabotage on both sides. Villages were burned, crops were destroyed, and countless lives were lost. But Nzinga was fighting for her people's survival, for their freedom, for their right to self-determination. And she was willing to do whatever it took to achieve her goals. It wasn't always glorious, but it was always necessary, at least in her mind. You take a deep breath, the humid air filling your lungs. The sun is starting to set, casting long shadows across the forest floor. You can hear the distant drumming of a celebration, maybe a victory, maybe just a chance to unwind after a long day of fighting. You can't help but feel a sense of awe and respect for Nzinga. She was a warrior queen, a brilliant strategist, and a symbol of resistance against colonial oppression. And she did it all while wearing a pretty fabulous headdress. Not a bad legacy, eh? Well, time for you to head back to the 21st century, with your mud-caked sneakers and mosquito bites. Hopefully, you've learned something about Queen Nzinga and her incredible guerrilla warfare tactics. And maybe, just maybe, you'll think twice before complaining about your next traffic jam. After all, at least you're not dodging Portuguese soldiers in the Angolan bush, right? Good night, or good morning, or good, whenever you're listening to this. And try not to get eaten by any wild animals. You're there. Knees deep in sand, the Saharan sun beating down on your neck. You can feel the fine grains working their way into your boots, a constant, irritating reminder of where you are, North Africa, 1578. Specifically, you're somewhere between Ksar el-Kabir and Asila, Morocco, and things aren't exactly going your way. Or anyone's way, really. It's hot. Like, really hot. And you're witnessing the tail end of something truly monumental, something that will reshape the political landscape of the region and, to some extent, the world. This is the Battle of Three Kings, also known as the Battle of Wadi al-Makazen, and frankly, it's a bit of a mess. See that plume of dust on the horizon? That's not just the wind. That's the Portuguese army, or what's left of it. You can almost taste the desperation hanging in the air, thick and gritty like the sand itself. They came here with King Sebastian, a young, ambitious ruler with dreams of a grand crusade, of reclaiming lost glories and maybe, just maybe, sticking it to the ever-expanding Ottoman Empire. What he got was, well, this. A rout. A disaster of epic proportions. One that smells faintly of overcooked sardines and broken dreams. Remember that mainstream historical fact I promised? Here it is. King Sebastian's death without an heir triggered a succession crisis in Portugal, ultimately leading to a personal union with Spain under Philip II in 1580. Pretty important, right? Like, world-changing important. But right now, that's just a future headache. Right now, you're just trying to avoid getting trampled by fleeing soldiers. And speaking of headaches, let's talk about Sebastian himself. He was enthusiastic. A bit too enthusiastic, some might say. Driven by a fervent religious zeal, he saw himself as a modern-day crusader, destined to drive the Muslims out of North Africa. He ignored the advice of his more experienced advisors, who cautioned him against such a rash undertaking. They pointed out the logistical challenges, the strength of the Moroccan forces, and, you know, the whole "it's a really, really bad idea" aspect of the plan. But Sebastian wouldn't listen. He was convinced that God was on his side. And that, my friends, is usually a recipe for disaster. Maybe he was just angling for a vacation, albeit a very violent one. Historians still argue whether Sebastian's motivations were purely religious or if there were underlying political and economic factors driving his ambition. Was it all about piety and faith, or was there a desire to control trade routes, secure resources, and expand Portuguese influence? Probably a bit of both, to be honest. Humans are complicated creatures, driven by a cocktail of motivations, and kings are no exception. You hear that buzzing sound? Probably a fly, or maybe it's the sound of historical debate swirling around us. Now, for that quirky little tidbit I promised. There's a legend surrounding King Sebastian, a sort of sleeping king myth, that he would return to Portugal in a time of great need and restore the country to its former glory. Sebastianism, as this belief became known, persisted for centuries after his death and even inspired various messianic movements. It's like the Portuguese version of King Arthur, only with more dead soldiers and less Camelot. The battle itself was brutal, a chaotic mess of clashing steel, desperate cries, and the stench of blood and sweat. Sebastian, ever the valiant, or foolhardy, leader, charged into the thick of the fighting, eager to prove his courage. He was never seen alive again. King Abd al-Malik of Morocco, the rightful claimant to the throne, also perished in the battle, collapsing from illness just before the fighting began. And then there was the third king, the dethroned Moroccan Sultan, Abu Abdullah Muhammad II Sa'di, who also died in the conflict. Hence the name, Battle of Three Kings. Talk about a bad day at the office. The Portuguese defeat at Qasr el-Kabir had profound consequences. It decimated the Portuguese nobility, draining the country of its leadership and resources. It also shattered the myth of Portuguese invincibility, exposing the weakness of their colonial empire. And, as mentioned earlier, it paved the way for the union with Spain, plunging Portugal into a period of Spanish rule that would last for 60 years. Okay, let's zoom in a little. You see that group of soldiers huddled around a tattered flag? Those are the survivors, the lucky ones who managed to escape the carnage. They're exhausted, demoralized, and probably wondering what the heck just happened. They're also probably regretting that second helping of bacalhau they had before the battle. The command structure, or lack thereof, during the battle was a major contributing factor to the Portuguese defeat. Sebastian, inexperienced and headstrong, often ignored the advice of his seasoned commanders. He made tactical blunders, failed to properly assess the terrain, and underestimated the strength of the Moroccan army. It was a classic case of youthful enthusiasm trumping strategic thinking. And let's face it, a lot of people paid the price for that. But it wasn't all Sebastian's fault, okay? Don't at me. The Moroccan army, led by Abd al-Malik, was well equipped and highly motivated. They had superior knowledge of the terrain and employed effective tactics that caught the Portuguese off guard. They also had the support of the local population, who were less than thrilled to have a bunch of European invaders traipsing through their country. And here's another open scholarly debate for you: to what extent was the Battle of Three Kings a clash of civilizations, and to what extent was it a power struggle between competing dynasties? Was it a religious war, a fight for control of trade routes, or simply a case of one ruler trying to overthrow another? Again, the answer is probably a complex mix of all of the above. History is rarely black and white, it's usually a swirling mess of shades of gray, just like the sand you're currently standing in. Now, back to the Portuguese. With Sebastian gone and the throne vacant, a power vacuum emerged. Cardinal Henry, Sebastian's great-uncle, reluctantly took the throne, but he was old and childless. His reign was brief and uneventful, and upon his death, several claimants vied for the crown. Philip II of Spain, who had a strong claim through his mother, ultimately prevailed, uniting the two Iberian kingdoms under his rule. This union, known as the Iberian Union, was a mixed blessing for Portugal. On the one hand, it brought economic stability and access to Spain's vast colonial empire. On the other hand, it meant that Portugal was now embroiled in Spain's wars, and its colonial possessions became targets for Spanish rivals, such as England and the Netherlands. You know what they say, you win some, you lose some, and then you get invaded. And that quirky tidbit I promised? During the Iberian Union, Portuguese identity was carefully cultivated by the elites. This was a grassroots effort to maintain independence from Spain. While politically tethered to Spain, you see a rise in specifically Portuguese literature and theatrical productions. Talk about passive aggression. You can almost feel the weight of history pressing down on you, the sense that everything is about to change. The shifting sands of power are rearranging the political landscape, and Portugal will never be quite the same. The dreams of empire are crumbling, replaced by the harsh reality of defeat. And all you can do is stand here, knee-deep in sand, and watch it all unfold. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to find a shady spot and try to avoid getting sunburned. It's been real. Right, so, the dust settles, somewhat. You're still sweating. Everyone's sweating. It's just that kind of humid, oppressive early afternoon in Bunda country. And the smell, well, let's just say gunpowder and hastily buried not-so-fresh corpses aren't exactly aromatherapy, are they? You wipe your brow with a sleeve that's probably seen better days, and, let's be honest, you've probably seen better days too. Around you, the remnants of the Mbangala war camp are less than impressive. A whole lot of looted goods, a whole lot of broken pottery, and a whole lot of very grumpy-looking Ndongo soldiers, trying to figure out what to do with all of it. It was a tactical victory, sure, but the real victory is that Nzinga is breathing. You're breathing. And for now, at least, the Portuguese seem to be reassessing. You see, while battles were certainly important, Nzinga knew that winning the war for Ndongo's survival required something more. Something that involved less bloodshed and more, well, talking. And sometimes, threatening. And sometimes, offering really, really good deals that were probably too good to be true. Nzinga calls for a council of war, or, more accurately, a council of, let's figure out how we're not going to die next week. It's much more inclusive than previous councils, too. Not just the traditional male chiefs, but also women warriors, spiritual leaders, and even some representatives from the subjugated groups that Ndongo had been, shall we say, less than friendly to in the past. Gotta broaden that support base, right? You grab a seat, well, more like a conveniently overturned bucket, near the edge of the circle, trying to look attentive and important, even though you mostly feel like you need a very long nap and maybe a plate of something that isn't dried meat. The debate is lively. Some argue for immediate retaliation, pushing the Portuguese back to Luanda, maybe even all the way into the sea. Others, remembering the brutal efficiency of Portuguese weaponry, suggest a more cautious approach. A few are just arguing for arguing's sake, because, you know, politics. Nzinga listens patiently, her face an unreadable mask. You can tell she's weighing every word, every nuance, every unspoken fear and desire. And then, she speaks. Her voice, though calm, carries a weight that silences the room. She proposes negotiation. A temporary peace, a ceasefire while both sides figure out what they actually want. This is met with mixed reactions, naturally. Some see it as a sign of weakness. Surrender by any other name. Others recognize the strategic brilliance. A chance to regroup, rearm, and, most importantly, to sow discord among the Portuguese and their allies. Historians still argue whether Nzinga truly believed in the possibility of a lasting peace, or whether she was simply playing for time. Regardless, the decision is made. Emissaries are sent. The Portuguese, surprised by the offer but also undoubtedly tired of the endless bush warfare, agree to meet. The location is neutral ground, a small village nestled between Ndongo territory and the Portuguese settlements. You get the distinct impression it was chosen because nobody actually wanted to live there. You're part of the delegation, of course. Mostly because you're good at looking inconspicuous and occasionally translating things, even if your Portuguese is still a work in progress. You spend most of the journey trying to remember all the phrases you've been taught. My queen desires peaceful relations. We seek a fair and just resolution. Please don't shoot us. The last one is probably the most important. The negotiations are tense. Really tense. You can practically taste the animosity hanging in the air. The Portuguese delegation, led by a stern-faced governor who looks like he hasn't smiled since he was a child, is demanding submission, tribute, and the right to continue trading slaves. Nzinga's representatives, equally unyielding, demand recognition of Ndongo's sovereignty, an end to the slave trade, and the return of territory seized by the Portuguese. There are a lot of dramatic pauses, meaningful glances, and veiled threats. You spend most of your time trying not to fidget, because you're pretty sure the governor is giving you the stink eye. Nzinga herself doesn't attend the first few sessions. She prefers to remain in the background, pulling the strings, observing the players. It's a power move, a way of reminding everyone who's really in charge. Plus, she probably needs a break from all the exhausting Queen Nzinga. Apparently, that involves a lot of paperwork and deciding which shade of red is best for the royal headdress. Who knew? One quirky historical tidbit is that during these types of negotiations, both sides would often bring elaborate gifts, hoping to sway the other. Think finely woven cloths, exotic animals, and, of course, plenty of alcohol. It was basically a really awkward gift exchange with life or death stakes. And there's always the underlying tension, a simmering resentment that threatens to boil over at any moment. You can see it in the way the Portuguese soldiers grip their muskets a little tighter, in the way the Ndongo warriors never take their eyes off them. One wrong word, one misplaced gesture, and the whole thing could erupt into another bloodbath. The breakthrough comes unexpectedly, during a particularly heated debate about territorial boundaries. One of the Portuguese negotiators, a younger man who seems genuinely troubled by the suffering he's witnessed, suggests a compromise. A smaller territory for the Portuguese, but with guaranteed access to trade routes. In return, they would formally recognize Nzinga as the rightful ruler of Ndongo and agree to limit their involvement in the slave trade, at least, officially. Nzinga, who has been observing the proceedings from a hidden vantage point, signals her approval. The deal is struck. A temporary peace is declared. Ceasefire ensues. It's not a perfect solution, not by a long shot. But it buys Ndongo time. Time to rebuild, time to strengthen its defenses, time to forge alliances. And most importantly, time for Nzinga to consolidate her power and prepare for the inevitable, well, the inevitable something. Nobody is quite sure what that something will be, but they know it's coming. The Portuguese are not known for their patience. You return to the Ndongo capital, weary but also strangely hopeful. The air smells a little less of gunpowder, a little more of, well, you're not quite sure what, but it's definitely an improvement. You even manage to find a semi-clean blanket and a relatively bug-free spot to sleep. Which, after the last few weeks, feels like pure luxury. The mainstream historical fact you should remember is this: Nzinga converted to Christianity, adopting the name Dona Ana de Souza, as part of her diplomatic strategy. Now, some historians paint this as a sincere conversion, while others see it as a purely political move to gain favor with the Portuguese. You, having witnessed the events firsthand, are inclined to believe it was a bit of both. Nzinga was nothing if not pragmatic, and she understood that in order to survive in this world, you sometimes had to play the game, even if you didn't particularly like the rules. In the meantime, though, you allow yourself a moment of quiet satisfaction. You played a small part, sure, but you played a part nonetheless. You helped to secure a temporary reprieve, a moment of peace in a world of constant conflict. It might not last, but for now, it's enough. Before you drift off to sleep, you can't help but wonder what the future holds. Will Nzinga be able to hold the Portuguese at bay? Will Ndongo survive as an independent kingdom? Will you ever get a decent meal that doesn't involve dried meat? These are the questions that plague your weary mind as you finally succumb to the sweet embrace of slumber. But just as you enter that dreamland, you remember something odd you saw back at the site of negotiations. Someone had been using a rather fine piece of Portuguese lace as toilet paper. Yes, there is always something that brings one back to reality. Alright, lean back, relax those shoulders, let's just settle into this whole Matamba thing. We're not rushing. It's time to build, to nurture, to, actually govern. Not just fight. Fighting is exhausting, anyway. You've been through enough skirmishes, enough close calls, that the thrill is probably wearing off. Besides, a kingdom built on war alone is like a house built on sand, isn't it? All very dramatic for the first 5 minutes, but then, *splush star. So, here you are, Queen Nzinga, back in Matamba. You've reclaimed your ancestral lands, more or less. You've got a, hopefully, loyal army, and a populace that, well, mostly listens to you. Now comes the hard part. The really hard part. Like, choosing a font for the royal decrees, hard. Or, deciding which shade of mud to use for the palace walls, hard. Okay, maybe not that hard, but definitely harder than shouting, "Charge!" at some bewildered Portuguese soldiers. You see the land with new eyes. It's not just a battlefield anymore. It's Potential. Fertile fields, rolling hills, the winding Kwanza River. It's begging for some serious infrastructure investment. Think roads, irrigation, maybe even, dare I say it, indoor plumbing? Okay, maybe not the plumbing. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. This is 17th century Africa, not Victorian England. You trudge through the market square in Kabasa. It's bustling, alright, but disorganized. Merchants hawking their wares with voices that could shatter glass, livestock wandering aimlessly, children playing tag in what appears to be a mud pit. Charming, sure. Efficient? Not so much. You can almost hear the cries of future economists weeping softly. Your advisors, bless their cotton socks, are full of ideas. Some good. Some, less so. One suggests building a giant statue of you made entirely of ivory. To inspire the people, Your Majesty. Right. Because nothing says, compassionate ruler, like a mountain of dead elephants. You gently suggest perhaps a slightly smaller, slightly less, Tuskwai, memorial. Maybe a nice portrait. Oil on canvas is all the rage in Europe, you hear. Or a tasteful tapestry. Speaking of Europeans, that brings us to the Portuguese. They're still around, lurking on the coast, doing their whole colonizing thing. You've managed to push them back, but they're not exactly gone. They're like that annoying houseguest who just won't take the hint. You know, the one who eats all your snacks and then complains about the lack of snacks. Mainstream historical fact number 1, the Portuguese presence in Angola during this period was primarily driven by the slave trade. They needed bodies to work the plantations in Brazil, and Angola was convenient. Horrifying, yes, but convenient for them. You need to solidify alliances. The Mbangala, for instance. Powerful warriors, fierce fighters, but also, shall we say, a bit eccentric. Their rituals are unconventional. Let's just say they make Burning Man look like a tea party. There's this one legend about their leader, King Yuri, who supposedly had a necklace made of human ears. Yikes. Talk about statement jewelry. Fringe tidbit right there. Historians still argue whether Nzinga's alliances with groups like the Mbangala were purely pragmatic or if she genuinely adopted some of their customs. Was it a matter of, when in Rome, or did she actually find some common ground with their beliefs? I'm not touching that one with a 10-foot pole. It's above my pay grade. You convene a council. The agenda, infrastructure. First, roads. Better roads. Roads that don't turn into quagmires after a light drizzle. You envision a network connecting Matamba's villages, facilitating trade and communication. You need engineers. Architects. People who know the difference between a load-bearing wall and, well, just a wall. You find a few locals with some experience in construction, and promise them a lifetime supply of, well, whatever the 17th century equivalent of a company pension is. Probably land. Or maybe a really nice goat. Next, agriculture. You need to ensure a stable food supply. No more relying on sporadic harvests and the whims of the weather. You encourage your people to cultivate new crops, to experiment with different farming techniques. Someone suggests importing coffee beans from Ethiopia. Imagine, Your Majesty, he says, his eyes gleaming, a beverage that keeps you awake and tastes good. You're intrigued. Sleep is becoming a distant memory these days. You establish granaries to store surplus grain, protecting against famine. You implement a system of weights and measures to ensure fair trade. You even consider introducing currency. Actual, standardized coins. No more bartering chickens for salt. Although, bartering chickens does have a certain rustic charm, doesn't it? You also recognize the importance of education. Not just for the elite, but for everyone. You establish schools where children can learn to read and write, to study mathematics and history. You want to cultivate a generation of informed, engaged citizens. Plus, literate scribes are infinitely less likely to accidentally set important documents on fire. Trust me. You spend hours poring over maps, planning the layout of new settlements, designing fortifications to protect against future invasions. You feel like an urban planner, a civil engineer, and a logistics expert, all rolled into one slightly sleep-deprived queen. You wonder if there's a university course for this sort of thing. Kingdom Management 101, How to Avoid a Coup d'etat. You remember a story you once heard about a Roman emperor who was said to have spent his evenings crafting intricate miniature sculptures. It seems that even the most powerful rulers need a creative outlet, a way to escape the pressures of leadership. You briefly consider taking up pottery. Or perhaps interpretive dance. But then you remember that you have an entire kingdom to run, and the thought of shaping clay, or flailing about on a stage, suddenly seems less appealing. You focus on justice. You establish a system of laws, clear and equitable, applied fairly to all. You appoint judges known for their wisdom and integrity. You even hold court yourself, listening to the grievances of your people, dispensing justice with a firm but compassionate hand. Quirky tidbit time: in some African cultures, disputes were often resolved through elaborate rituals involving music, dance, and storytelling. It wasn't just about determining guilt or innocence, it was about restoring harmony and healing the community. Now that's a legal system I can get behind. Imagine settling a contract dispute with a good old-fashioned dance-off. The judge would have to provide commentary. You also address social issues. You work to protect the vulnerable, to care for the sick and the elderly. You establish orphanages and hospitals. You encourage your people to practice compassion and empathy. Basically, you're trying to create a society that isn't entirely barbaric. Baby steps, right? Of course, all this requires money. Lots of it. You need to find new sources of revenue. You explore trade opportunities, sending emissaries to neighboring kingdoms. You develop new industries, encouraging your people to produce goods that can be sold abroad. You even consider taxation. A revolutionary idea, you think? Or maybe just a really unpopular one. Mainstream historical fact number 2, many African kingdoms, including those in the Congo region, had complex systems of trade and taxation long before European contact. They weren't just sitting around waiting to be civilized. They had sophisticated economies and thriving societies. You're constantly balancing competing interests. The needs of the military versus the needs of the people. The demands of the aristocracy versus the needs of the commoners. The desire for progress versus the preservation of tradition. It's a never-ending tightrope walk. You feel like a juggler with a dozen flaming torches, each representing a different faction or interest group. But slowly, gradually, things begin to improve. The roads become smoother, the fields become more fertile, the markets become more organized. The people seem happier. More hopeful. You see smiles on faces that were once etched with worry. You hear laughter in villages that were once filled with fear. Historians still argue whether Nzinga's efforts to consolidate power in Matamba were ultimately successful. Did she create a lasting and prosperous kingdom, or was her reign merely a temporary reprieve from the forces of colonialism? The debate rages on. Spoiler alert, history is rarely cut and dried, is it? You feel a sense of accomplishment. You've built something. Something tangible. Something lasting. You've created a kingdom not just of warriors, but of farmers, traders, artists, and scholars. A kingdom based not just on power, but on justice, compassion, and, well, hopefully a little bit of indoor plumbing eventually. You allow yourself a small smile. Maybe, just maybe, you're actually doing this right. And that's got to feel pretty good. So, what happens next? We'll just have to see, won't we? Alright, settle in, friend. Dim the lights, fluff your pillow, and let's dive back into the not-so-peaceful twilight of your reign. Think of it as the extended director's cut, but with more sieges and slightly fewer dragons. No dragons, actually. My bad. You stand on the ramparts, the wind whipping strands of hair across your face. Smells like rain and, is that burning hay? Yup, definitely burning hay. Always a party foul when it's your hay. The enemy, those charming chaps, are back for another round. Apparently, that last thrashing you gave them wasn't quite convincing enough. You sigh dramatically, the kind that only queens can pull off without looking like they're auditioning for a soap opera. Honestly, running a kingdom is exhausting. It's like being a project manager, therapist, and bouncer all rolled into one slightly overdressed package. Plus the whole, getting murdered by your cousin, anxiety. The siege engines, those delightful medieval contraptions, are being wheeled into position. You can practically hear the gears creaking and the poor oxen moaning. It's all rather rustic, isn't it? You wonder if they offer express delivery on siege engines these days. Probably not through Amazon Prime. You squint at the approaching forces. They seem more numerous than last time. Perhaps they've been recruiting down at the local tavern. Join the army. See the world. Probably die. You can't deny, the benefits package seems lacking. You turn to your captain, a grizzled veteran with a permanent squint and a voice like gravel gargling with iron filings. Ready the defenses, Captain, you command, your voice firm despite the creeping sense of, here we go again. He nods, his face a mask of grim determination. He's seen it all before, this guy. Bet he has stories. Probably not the kind you'd want to hear before bedtime, though. The first volley of stones slams into the castle walls with a satisfying thud. Not satisfying for the walls, mind you. More like, satisfyingly predictable. Like watching a cat try to catch its own tail. You resist the urge to roll your eyes. Professionalism, darling, professionalism. Speaking of predictability, did you know that siege warfare in the Middle Ages often involved psychological tactics? Like, they'd fling corpses over the walls to spread disease and demoralize the defenders. Charming, right? It's like the ancient version of passive-aggressive office warfare, but with significantly more rotting flesh. Historians still argue whether these tactics were truly effective or just a particularly gruesome form of medieval trolling. Personally, you'd probably just order in a pizza for the defenders. Nothing boosts morale like a well-placed pepperoni. The siege drags on. Days bleed into nights. The constant barrage of projectiles becomes a monotonous soundtrack to your life. You find yourself strangely drawn to the patterns of the stone impacts, almost like a morbid form of abstract art. You even start sketching them in your diary. Siege Abstract Number 3, featuring a particularly dramatic impact crater near the West Tower. 4 out of 5 stars. Rations are running low. Morale is flagging. You've started rationing the wine, which, let's be honest, is basically a war crime. The captain keeps giving you those, we're all going to die, looks, which is so not helping. You try to rally the troops with inspiring speeches, but even you can tell your heart isn't really in it. You're pretty sure you accidentally quoted a motivational poster at one point. Hang in there, baby, or we're all gonna hang. Literally. But just when things seem darkest, a glimmer of hope appears on the horizon. Literally. A small contingent of your loyal troops, led by your most trusted general, has managed to break through the enemy lines and is heading towards the castle. You let out a whoop of joy that surprises even yourself. Maybe you can pull this off. The battle that follows is fierce and bloody. You watch from the ramparts, your heart pounding in your chest. Arrows whiz past your head. You duck instinctively, realizing that perhaps you should have worn a helmet. Fashionable headwear is all well and good, but it doesn't exactly offer much protection against pointy projectiles. You witness acts of incredible bravery and heartbreaking sacrifice. A young soldier, barely more than a boy, throws himself in front of an arrow to save his comrade. A grizzled veteran, his face covered in blood, fights with the ferocity of a cornered lion. You feel a surge of pride and a deep sense of responsibility. These people are fighting for you. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, the tide begins to turn. Your reinforcements, fueled by adrenaline and the promise of a good night's sleep, and maybe some wine, push back the enemy forces. The attackers, demoralized and exhausted, begin to retreat. You can see it in their faces, the realization that they've been beaten. Again. A cheer erupts from within the castle walls. You allow yourself a small smile. Victory. For now. But even as you celebrate, you know that this is not the end. The conflict is far from over. Your enemies are persistent, and they will undoubtedly be back. You are playing a Game of Thrones, and the stakes are higher than ever. And speaking of thrones, let's just say yours isn't the most comfortable. It's basically a glorified wooden chair with some fancy fabric draped over it. You've considered getting an ergonomic upgrade, but you're pretty sure that would violate some ancient royal decree about maintaining the solemnity of the sovereign seat. So, you're stuck with a backache and a numb bum. The price of power, darling, the price of power. Interestingly, the concept of the Iron Throne from Game of Thrones wasn't entirely made up. While not made of swords, many medieval thrones were symbols of power, often incorporating precious metals and jewels to signify the ruler's wealth and authority. Some even had hidden compartments for storing snacks. Okay, probably not snacks. Important documents and secret assassination daggers, most likely. Beyond the immediate threats, whispers of dissent are growing within your own court. Some nobles, disgruntled by your policies or simply ambitious for power, are plotting against you. You can feel the tension in the air, the subtle glances, the hushed conversations. It's like living in a medieval version of Mean Girls, but with fewer lip glosses and considerably more treachery. You begin to rely more and more on your advisors, those loyal few who you trust implicitly. But even among them, you know that there are potential spies and informants. It's a constant game of cat and mouse, trying to figure out who is on your side and who is simply waiting for an opportunity to stab you in the back. Metaphorically, of course. Although, knowing your luck, it could be literal. You also face challenges from within your own family. Your siblings, cousins, and various other relatives are all vying for a piece of the pie. They see you as a hurdle to their own ambitions, a roadblock on the path to power. Family gatherings become excruciatingly awkward affairs, filled with veiled insults and passive-aggressive digs. You start to dread birthdays and holidays. You'd rather face an army of invading barbarians than endure another family dinner. One particularly annoying cousin, let's call him Bertram, because, let's face it, that's exactly the kind of name he'd have, is particularly persistent in his attempts to undermine you. He spreads rumors about your incompetence, questions your legitimacy, and generally makes your life a living hell. You're pretty sure he's also been stealing your biscuits. You've started hiding them in your chambers, but even that doesn't seem to deter him. The man is a biscuit ninja. You contemplate having him arrested, or perhaps even, dealt with. But you know that such actions would only further inflame the situation and create more enemies. Besides, you're not entirely sure you could get away with it. Bertram has powerful allies, and you don't want to start a full-blown civil war. So, you decide to play the long game. You gather evidence of Bertram's treachery, carefully documenting his every misstep. You cultivate alliances with his rivals, subtly encouraging them to compete with him. You wait for the opportune moment to strike. It's like a chess match, but with higher stakes and significantly more political maneuvering. Historians still debate the best approach to dealing with internal dissent. Some argue that a strong and decisive ruler should crush all opposition without mercy. Others believe that diplomacy and compromise are the key to maintaining stability. You tend to lean towards the latter, although you wouldn't rule out the occasional well-placed threat. And that threat needs to be well-placed, because the consequences of this conflict could change the course of your reign. But maybe we can pick this up tomorrow. It's getting late, the siege engines are still warming up, and someone really needs a biscuit. You deserve a rest, friend. Sleep well, if you can. You're sinking into the plush cushions of your favorite armchair, a steaming mug of chamomile tea warming your hands. The fire crackles softly, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Time to settle in for another chapter of our utterly enthralling story of Queen Nzinga. And don't worry, I won't launch into a lecture about boring treaties and trade routes right away, though they will eventually become unavoidable. You're now Nzinga. The year is, well, let's say it's shortly after you've cleverly established your authority in Matamba, a new, strategically advantageous kingdom, after taking it over in a daring move. Forget the idea that you merely inherited the throne. You seized it. And you're acutely aware that your reign, your very survival, hinges on more than just military prowess. You need to govern. Yikes, right? So, let's get right into the internal stuff. Think of your kingdom as a slightly chaotic, definitely underfunded startup. You've got brilliant, ambitious people, but also a fair share of, shall we say, less driven individuals. Your first task. Consolidate power. One of the ways you do this is through incorporating runaway slaves and deserters into your army and administration. You offer them land, status, a new life, and, most importantly, loyalty to you. Smart move. You are turning potential enemies into devoted followers. It's a bit like recruiting from your competitor's disgruntled workforce. Just don't let HR catch you. And you're a stickler for details. Ever the perfectionist, you're constantly traveling throughout your domain, personally overseeing legal disputes, settling land disagreements, and ensuring your people are, at least outwardly, content. You become renowned for your sharp legal mind and unwavering commitment to justice. Although, let's be honest, justice often translates to whatever benefits Nzinga the most. Ah, the burdens of leadership. One thing you also encourage is trade. The Dutch, you know, those guys with the clogs and fondness for tulips, are always looking for new sources of resources. And you, my friend, have resources. Ivory, textiles, copper, slaves, unfortunately. So you foster these trade relationships, but, you have learned from past experiences, never without carefully negotiated terms. You're not about to let them waltz in and exploit you. Fair trade or no trade, that's your motto. It's sort of like when you're selling something online, you always make sure to include all the shipping costs and handling fees so the buyer isn't surprised. Gotta be transparent. Now, let's talk about religion. The Portuguese are always trying to convert everyone to Catholicism, and while you're not exactly buying what they're selling wholesale, you are clever enough to recognize the political advantage in playing along, sometimes. You even adopt Christianity as a tool to improve relations and strengthen alliances with certain European powers. You're not necessarily shedding your traditional African beliefs, wink wink, but a little religious diplomacy never hurt anyone, right? It is like when your in-laws visit. You pretend to like their cooking but sneak out for pizza later. Ah, but how about the fringe stuff? Now this is where it gets interesting. Rumors abound that you possessed a network of spies and informants that spanned across Angola and even reached into Portuguese settlements. They were whispering secrets to you, keeping you one step ahead of your enemies. Some even say you employed magical practices and traditional African shamanism to aid you in your strategies. Look, the truth is lost in the mists of time, but it sure sounds like a Netflix series, right? Moving on to foreign relations, let's not forget that pesky Portuguese presence. You are always wary of their expansionist ambitions. They are like the annoying neighbors who keep borrowing your lawnmower and never return it. So, you engage in a delicate dance of diplomacy and warfare. You send envoys, negotiate treaties, and forge alliances with other African kingdoms. You're a master of divide and conquer, playing different European powers against each other to secure your own interests. There's also the issue of Angola. This is the battleground where your diplomacy gets truly tested. The Portuguese want it. You want to control it. Everyone wants a peace. You attempt to forge alliances with the Mbangala, fierce warrior bands, to fight against the Portuguese. These alliances were often uneasy, but they served as a crucial tool in your fight against colonial expansion. Let's face it, politics makes strange bedfellows. And you're a master of propaganda. You craft narratives that portray you as the rightful ruler, the defender of African independence, and the protector of your people. It's all about shaping the story. Think of it as having your own personal PR team working overtime. Your charisma and diplomatic skills are legendary, even among the European powers who are constantly trying to undermine you. But everything wasn't always rainbows and unicorns. Historians still argue whether Nzinga was truly devoted to abolishing slavery. On one hand, she offered sanctuary to runaway slaves and incorporated them into her army. On the other hand, she also engaged in the slave trade to acquire weapons and resources. The historical record is ambiguous, and your motives, as with any leader, are likely complex and nuanced. Now here is a peculiar tidbit. One of your strategies involved sending female envoys to negotiate with Portuguese officials. This was considered highly unusual for the time, as diplomacy was typically the domain of men. But you, being the absolute boss that you are, used this to your advantage. The Portuguese were often caught off guard by these female ambassadors, and you would be able to leverage their unfamiliarity with the traditional power structures to gain an edge in negotiations. It is like bringing your grandma to negotiate a car deal. Nobody expects it. You were a shrewd politician, constantly adapting to changing circumstances. You understood the importance of building strong alliances, both internally and externally. You realized that your survival depended on maintaining a balance of power, and you were willing to do whatever it took to protect your kingdom and people. But sometimes, even queens need a little help from their friends, or a stiff drink. In your case, a bit of both. One thing that you were rather clever about was setting up the quilombos, which, in today's language, might be called free zones. These were communities of escaped slaves, and they often resisted colonial rule. While you weren't directly controlling them, you recognized their strategic value as a buffer zone and a source of potential recruits. You fostered a sense of shared identity and resistance among these communities, and they played a vital role in your overall struggle against the Portuguese. It's like planting trees on your property line to annoy the neighbor, but in a very, very strategic way. And you have to contend with betrayals, plots, and infighting within your own court. There are always people trying to undermine you, eager to seize power for themselves. You have to be constantly vigilant, always watching your back, and ready to strike down any threat to your authority. It's exhausting, honestly. Remember that one time you got a birthday cake and then someone ate half of it when you were out? It's like that, only with kingdoms at stake. It's worth remembering that Nzinga's reign wasn't just about war and politics. You also fostered a thriving culture and economy in Matamba. You encouraged arts, crafts, and agriculture, transforming the kingdom into a center of trade and prosperity. You were not just a warrior queen, but also a patron of the arts, a shrewd businesswoman, and a visionary leader. Now, something that is often overlooked is your understanding of the power of symbolism. You consciously adopted male dress and mannerisms, challenging traditional gender roles and projecting an image of strength and authority. You surrounded yourself with female warriors, further defying societal expectations and creating a powerful visual statement about your reign. It's like wearing a power suit to a pajama party. You're making a statement. And let's not forget, the Portuguese are stubborn. They don't just go away because you ask nicely. Your diplomatic efforts often fail, leading to renewed conflict. You fight battles, negotiate truces, and then fight some more. It's a constant cycle of violence and negotiation, and it takes a toll on you and your people. One thing that is known for sure is that your leadership skills is top tier. But despite the challenges, you never give up. You continue to fight for the independence of your kingdom, to protect your people, and to preserve your legacy. You are an extraordinary leader, a woman of immense courage, intellect, and determination. And, even though you don't particularly like it, you are a symbol of resistance against colonialism. So, pour yourself another cup of tea, settle back into your armchair, and reflect on the remarkable life and reign of Queen Nzinga. And consider that, perhaps, our challenges today are not so different from hers. Maybe we can all learn something from her unwavering determination, her shrewd diplomacy, and her commitment to justice. And maybe, just maybe, we can all be a little bit more like Nzinga. Alright, settle in, settle in. Let's dim the lights just a little bit, and maybe put on some ambient rain sounds. Good. Good. Because we're diving back into Angola, specifically, the enduring, whispering legacy of Queen Nzinga. And, look, legacies. They're tricky things, aren't they? They're not just simple monuments or dates in history books. No, they're more like echoes. Echoes bouncing off the walls of time. Sometimes clear, sometimes distorted, but always, always present. You're standing in modern-day Angola, maybe Luanda, its bustling capital. The air is thick, heavy with the scent of the Atlantic, diesel fumes, and something vaguely floral. You hear the clamor of traffic, the lilting sounds of Portuguese mingling with Kimbundu, the local Bantu language. The sun beats down, relentless. It feels, well, vibrant. Alive. And under it all, beneath the surface, is Nzinga's impact. Think of it like this: you see a strong, independent woman leading a protest today, advocating for human rights. You see political cartoons depicting a leader as cunning and resourceful. You see the pride in Angolan art, the preservation of indigenous culture despite centuries of colonial rule. These are all, in their own way, ripples from the stone Nzinga threw into the pond of history. Nzinga, remember, she wasn't just a queen. She was a symbol. A symbol of resistance, of defiance, of unwavering determination in the face of impossible odds. A mainstream historical fact, one you probably already know, is that she fought tooth and nail against the Portuguese colonizers throughout the 17th century. We're talking decades. Decades of guerrilla warfare, strategic alliances, and political maneuvering. Now, here's a quirky tidbit. Legend has it, Nzinga employed a whole harem of male concubines who dressed as women and served as her bodyguards. Talk about subverting gender roles, right? It's definitely one way to make a statement. Although, if they ever accidentally called her boss, I bet they regretted it immediately. You see, she understood power. Not just military power, but the power of perception, the power of narrative. She used it all to her advantage. She's like the Beyoncé of 17th century Angola, really. Fierce, strategic, and totally owning her destiny. But how much of what we know about Nzinga is fact, and how much is carefully crafted myth? Historians still argue whether her conversion to Christianity was a genuine spiritual awakening or a calculated political move to gain leverage with the Portuguese. It's a fascinating debate, because it gets to the core of what makes a leader authentic in the first place. Are they driven by pure conviction, or are they constantly weighing the practical consequences of their actions? Imagine yourself in her sandals, probably not very comfortable sandals, by the way. You're constantly surrounded by danger, betrayal is a constant threat, and the very survival of your people hangs in the balance. Would you hesitate to use every tool at your disposal, even if it meant compromising your principles just a little bit? The legacy extends beyond the battlefield, you know. It seeps into the culture, the art, the very soul of Angola. Look at Angolan music, for example. The rhythms, the melodies, the lyrics, they often speak of resilience, of struggle, of the importance of remembering the past. And who embodies that more than Nzinga? She's practically the soundtrack to Angolan independence. Here's another layer to consider: her impact on the status of women in Angolan society. While it's definitely a stretch to say she single-handedly achieved gender equality, let's be real, that hasn't happened anywhere yet. She undeniably shattered some pretty significant glass ceilings. She proved that a woman could be a warrior, a diplomat, a ruler, and a force to be reckoned with. That's no small feat, especially in a world dominated by men. I read somewhere that the Portuguese were absolutely terrified of her, which I think is hilarious. They thought she had magical powers. I mean, sure, strategic brilliance can seem like magic when you're on the receiving end of it. But what they saw as witchcraft, she probably just saw as really, really good planning. You can almost feel her presence in the streets of Luanda. In the faces of the people. It's there in the way they carry themselves, in their determination, in their refusal to be defined by the scars of their colonial past. Speaking of Luanda, here's a slightly random, but I think relevant, fact: Luanda was a major center for the transatlantic slave trade. Just, let that sink in for a moment. The same city that now celebrates Nzinga as a national hero was once a hub for the very system she fought so hard to dismantle. It's a stark reminder of the complexities of history, and how the same place can be both a source of immense suffering and a symbol of hope. Now, a quirky side note: apparently, Nzinga had a particular fondness for chess. There's even a story that she used a chess game to negotiate a treaty with the Portuguese governor. Can you imagine the tension in that room? Every move laden with political significance. Every captured piece a metaphor for the shifting balance of power. If they ever turned that into a movie, I would watch it. Especially if they cast Anya Taylor-Joy as Nzinga. And here's a question that historians still wrestle with: to what extent did Nzinga's resistance actually delay the Portuguese colonization of Angola? Some argue that she was ultimately unsuccessful, and that the Portuguese would have conquered the region regardless. Others believe that she bought valuable time for her people, preserving their culture and laying the groundwork for future resistance movements. It's impossible to say for sure, but the fact that we're still debating it centuries later speaks volumes about the magnitude of her influence. Think of her as a flickering candle in the darkness. She may not have been able to extinguish the darkness completely, but she kept the flame alive, inspiring others to carry on the fight. Her legacy even touches contemporary Angolan politics. You see her name invoked by politicians, used to justify policies, and held up as an example of strong leadership. She's become a national symbol, uniting people across different ethnic groups and political factions. It's not that everyone agrees on everything, that's never going to happen, but Nzinga provides a common point of reference, a shared sense of identity. One historical detail: Nzinga ruled for over 30 years, which is a pretty long time, especially considering the incredibly turbulent circumstances. I mean, imagine running a country while simultaneously fighting a war, negotiating treaties, and managing a complex network of alliances. You'd need a serious nap after that, right? Like, a decade-long nap. Now, for a slightly odd little factoid, some historians believe that Nzinga may have been a bit of a germaphobe. Apparently, she insisted on using her own personal cutlery and drinking vessels, even when dining with foreign dignitaries. Maybe she was just ahead of her time. I bet she would have loved hand sanitizer. And here's something for the historians to chew on: how did Nzinga manage to maintain her power and influence for so long, despite facing constant internal and external threats? Was it her military prowess? Her political savvy? Her charisma? Or was it a combination of all three, plus a healthy dose of good luck? The answer, as always, is probably more complex than we can fully understand. When you look at modern-day Angola, you see a country grappling with the legacy of colonialism, the challenges of development, and the complexities of nation-building. But you also see a country that is fiercely proud of its history, its culture, and its identity. And at the heart of that pride is the story of Queen Nzinga. You walk through the streets, and maybe you see a mural of her, painted in vibrant colors, her face strong and determined. Or you hear her name mentioned in a song, a poem, a political speech. She's everywhere, in a way. Not physically, of course. But her spirit, her legacy, it's woven into the fabric of Angola. It's a constant reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, it's possible to resist, to fight for what you believe in, and to leave a lasting impact on the world. And that, my friends, is a legacy worth remembering. A legacy worth whispering about in the quiet of the night. Okay, settle in, friend. Let's gently glide through the final chapter of Queen Nzinga's incredible life. And don't worry, no pop quizzes later. Just relax, maybe sip some tea, and let the story wash over you. So, you find yourself witnessing the twilight years of a legend. Nzinga is older now, much older, but don't think for a second that she's mellowed out. Imagine her, still sharp-witted, still issuing orders, still commanding respect, maybe even more so now because every wrinkle on her face tells a story. She's like the Gandalf of 17th century Angola. Except, you know, with significantly less beard and substantially more strategic brilliance. Historians still argue whether her advanced age actually enhanced her aura of power or simply made everyone a little bit afraid to disagree with a woman who'd probably seen it all. I mean, who wants to argue with someone who's probably forgotten more about politics than you'll ever know? You're observing her court. There are still diplomatic envoys, still tense negotiations with the Portuguese, though now they mostly involve solidifying borders and maintaining a fragile peace. And Nzinga, she's playing the long game. You see her meticulously building up her kingdom, fostering agriculture, and promoting trade. It's not just about military might anymore, it's about creating a stable and prosperous nation. Apparently, even queens have to worry about the economy. Talk about a high-pressure job. You might notice the younger generation around her, eager to learn at the feet of the master strategist. She's passing on her wisdom, her tactics, her unwavering belief in the sovereignty of Ndongo and Matamba. It's like a masterclass in badassery, and you get a front-row seat. Although, she does have a funny habit of testing their loyalty by randomly assigning them to muck out the royal stables. Apparently, character building comes in many forms. But time, as it always does, keeps marching on. The years tick by, and Nzinga, even with her indomitable spirit, starts to feel the weight of them. Remember, she's lived through decades of war, political intrigue, and personal loss. That kind of life leaves its mark. Her health starts to decline, slowly but inevitably. And then, in 1663, at the ripe old age of 82, or thereabouts, historical records vary, like opinions on pineapple pizza, Nzinga, Queen of Ndongo and Matamba, passes away. It's a pivotal moment. The news ripples through the kingdom, and beyond. Imagine the collective intake of breath, the hushed whispers, the lioness is gone. I bet the Portuguese finally cracked open that celebratory bottle of port they'd been saving. Don't tell anyone I said that. You're witnessing the elaborate funeral rituals. The people of Ndongo and Matamba mourn their queen with a grief that is both profound and genuine. She's not just a ruler, she's a symbol of resistance, of resilience, of hope. They bury her with the honors befitting a warrior queen, a diplomat, and a national hero. Apparently, when you're that important, you get to skip the whole ashes in an urn thing. Now, let's fast forward a bit. You're strolling through modern-day Angola. You see Nzinga everywhere, in statues, in street names, in school textbooks. She's a national icon, a symbol of Angolan identity. She's even on the currency. Talk about job security. It's a testament to her enduring legacy, to the impact she had on her people and her country. You might overhear conversations about her. People still debate her strategies, her motivations, her complex relationship with the Portuguese. Historians still argue whether her conversion to Christianity was a genuine spiritual awakening or a calculated political move. Was she a saint? A pragmatist? A ruthless leader? Probably a bit of all three, really. It's what makes her such a fascinating figure. And it's why she continues to inspire people centuries after her death. You see artists creating portraits of her, writers telling her story, musicians composing songs in her honor. Her image is everywhere, a constant reminder of the power of resistance and the importance of fighting for what you believe in. There's even a theory, a bit fringe, mind you, that some Angolan martial arts styles incorporate elements of Nzinga's own fighting techniques. I'm just saying, don't mess with anyone who looks like they might have learned a thing or two from a warrior queen. You notice the Nzinga University. A place of learning, shaping the minds of future generations. What better way to honor her memory than to invest in education and knowledge? Although, I hope they have decent Wi-Fi there. Nzinga would probably have conquered the internet if she had it at her disposal. And you realize, as you look around, that Nzinga's legacy isn't just about the past. It's about the present and the future. It's about inspiring people to stand up for themselves, to fight for justice, and to never give up on their dreams. It's about reminding us that even in the face of overwhelming odds, one person can make a difference. Her memory lives on not only in Angola, but across the diaspora, and in the hearts of everyone who values freedom and self-determination. I'll bet you didn't know she even has a crater named after her on Venus. Now, if that's not galactic recognition, I don't know what is. So there you have it, the incredible life and enduring legacy of Queen Nzinga. A warrior queen, a diplomat, a visionary leader, and a true legend. Wind down. And now, friend, as the echoes of Nzinga's story gently fade, allow yourself to drift into a space of quiet reflection. Picture the rolling hills of Angola, the sun setting over the horizon, casting long shadows across the land she fought so fiercely to protect. Feel the warmth of the African sun on your skin, hear the soft rustling of the wind in the trees, and imagine the distant rhythm of drums, celebrating her life and her legacy. Let the images of Nzinga, the warrior queen, the shrewd diplomat, the inspiring leader, soften around the edges, like a dream slowly dissolving into the morning light. There is no need to hold on tight to the details, simply allow the essence of her spirit, her unwavering determination, her fierce love for her people, to settle deep within you. Breathe in deeply, and release any lingering tension or worry. Feel your body relaxing, your mind becoming still. The world outside can wait. For now, simply be present in this moment, surrounded by the quiet comfort of your own thoughts. The story of Nzinga reminds us of the power of resilience, the importance of standing up for what we believe in, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Close your eyes if you wish, and imagine yourself wrapped in a soft, warm blanket of peace. Let the worries of the day drift away like clouds in the sky. You are safe, you are loved, and you are worthy of rest. Sweet dreams.